Okay. Good morning, Dr. Rosensweet.
Good morning, Carolyn.
It's so good to see you.
Technical issues. Well, we're starting officially right now.
OMG. So as I was saying, being in school, having a birthday, getting a new computer, I have entered now into the land of learning how to rocket a spaceship, I think, with all this technology. But I do have questions and I know how to read those. And guess what? I have them for you. And I have your book right here with me, too, because I want to refer to something. So good morning, Dr. Rosensweet.
Good morning, Carolyn. Good to see you again. This is
It's
great.
always good to see you.
I'm
Yeah,
glad we're reconnecting. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. Working on it. So that's really cool. And welcome to the ladies. And anyway, so I went ahead, I sent you some questions, and I'm going to go ahead and start with the first one. Here we go. Okay, so dear Dr. Rosensweet, it says, have you come across women who cannot tolerate estriol? I have read in Happy Healthy Hormones about the A and B receptors. I believe that's the alpha and beta receptors. And I'm trying to make sense as to how all of this works. When I use Biest, all of my symptoms come back. But if I only use estradiol, I seem to be okay. I want to use Biest to be the healthiest I can be, but I'm very confused. Can you help me with this?
This is an unusual situation. 25 years of using Biest. I have never run into someone who didn't tolerate estriol in very high percentages. Like, for example, we start out with a Biest that has 4 times as much estriol in it as it does estradiol.
Right.
It's a Biest 80-20. That means 80% of that bias, that estrogen, is estriol, and 20% is estradiol. Now, that's the original startup percent. We only change that percentage if on 24-hour urine hormone testing, the test results suggest that a woman could use more estradiol and less estriol. And we'll see that on the 24-hour urine hormone test results.
Right.
And we'll make adjustments in that ratio, estriol to estradiol, only, and I mean only, if we see evidence on a 24-hour urine hormone test only that those adjustment needs to be made. And some women do need to have more estradiol and less estriol. And sometimes I get a hint of that in their story. Sometimes I'll treat them with Biest, and after checking in with them in a couple of weeks or in a month, they're saying, gosh, I do feel better, but I don't feel quite right. And that's one of my first hints.
Yeah.
That, I wonder if that is in the ratio. But I always test to see if it shows up in the ratio, and we'll adjust that ratio according to that testing, and we'll change it from 80-20 to 70-30. That means 70% estriol and 30% estradiol. In other words, we are increasing the strength of the estradiol.
So adjust really is the operative word there. It's not set in stone, that one.
But we only adjust according to the final testing there. Symptoms alone, I'm not going to adjust the ratio. And we'll go to 60-40, we'll go to 50-50, but we'll only do that when we're looking at how the estrogens are metabolized in the 24-hour urine. Now, I have seen that it's very common out there for clinicians to even start out with 50-50. And yet, my guess is those folks are not doing 24-hour urine hormone tests, because you're not going to copy nature. In other words, one of the things I like to do is I like to replicate a woman's natural estriol to estradiol balance.
Yes.
And in a young menstruating woman, she has more estriol than she has the sum of estradiol and estrone. And sometimes she'll have twice as much estradiol, but she'll at least have 1.1 or 1.3 times the amount of estradiol. She's got the sum of estradiol and estrone. So
Right.
we like to see a 24-hour urine hormone test reflect what nature does for a woman to begin with. We're not trying to replicate nature's levels of youthful hormones. No, 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 no. And we've gone into this topic, and I'll go into it again, not today, but if someone asks that question. But we do want to replicate nature's ratios. And we can only do that with the 24-hour urine hormone test. Now, rarely I've had to make such dramatic adjustments from that original 80-20. I have one patient who is on 20-80. And it's only when we get her on 20-80 that her 24-hour urine hormone test copies nature, shows the ratios like they would in nature. Now, this woman has been a landscape. She's had her own landscaping business for 30 years. And having her own landscaping business, she's been exposed to a lot of herbicides, insecticides, pesticides, and for forever. I've been treating her for 20 years. Forever, I've suspected that she's had receptor site issues because these petrochemicals that they use to kill, eliminate, herbs and weeds and stuff and insects. They're estrogen mimickers. When they enter the human body, they're called xenoestrogen. They'll go in there and they'll occupy estrogen receptor sites. Of all the things in the world they could do, wouldn't you know they're going to occupy estrogen receptor sites? Well, that's
those don't show up on tests, do they?
They don't.
Right.
There are toxicity tests that are available to functional medicine healthcare professionals. And yes, they can be picked up. You can measure someone's herbicides and pesticide levels in their body. Yuck. But at any rate, I'd say 75% of the women that I start out on 80% estradiol and 20% estradiol stay on it. And 25% need minor adjustments from 70-30 to 60-40 and rarely 50-50. And one thing that you need to know is if you increase the percentage of estradiol, you do a dramatic increase in the estradiol strength. So these things are not to be done by amateurs.
Well, I was just going to say, because in your book, you say, no matter what transdermal hormone preparation you use, oils, gels, creams, no matter what dosage, strength, ratio, the most important thing I want you to remember is that when you stabilize on your regimen, it is imperative that you do the 24-hour urine hormone test. And you have this really amazing little cartoon, and it's about dosing. And, my feeling is that maybe what women do is they get some estriol and maybe they get some estradiol, and they try to combine the two on their own. This is just my fantasy.
Let's not go there.
Okay.
That's not how it happens. If they're going to get biased, it's going to usually be prescribed 99% of the time. Although I do know that some bias of some very shady quality is being offered on the internet. But I want to do with the standard things, and I want to address another element of it.
Okay.
In a young woman, there's 2 phases to the menstrual cycle. And after a woman has menstruated, her hormone levels start to really increase. And in fact, they peak around day 12. They get the highest they're ever going to be. And what they're going to do is they're going to prepare a woman as if she's going to get pregnant.
Right.
And not only that, it's so wild. Mm-hmm. The hormonal balance is also preparing her for potential breastfeeding during the first part of that cycle. And in order to do that, you have to stimulate breast glandular cells.
Yes.
In fact, most women will notice that their breasts get fuller as the cycle progresses. They're actually adding cells. They're actually adding breast glandular cells as if they were preparing for breastfeeding right there in the cycle.
Yes.
If they do not get pregnant, those additional cells, which, by the way, got there by cell division, otherwise known as mitosis, they disappear by a process called apoptosis.
Yeah.
I always considered that to be, they just pop open and they're gone. Apoptosis.
Apoptosis.
And that happens every cycle if a woman doesn't get pregnant. Well, the building up to potential implantation of the endometrium, the lining to the uterus, and the building up for potential breastfeeding, in other words, increase in breast glandular cells, is under the direction of estrogen receptor sites. The estrogens themselves link up with the receptor sites, and it's that linkage that initiates the action of preparing breasts for potential lactation.
Right.
And it's under the direction of an estrogen receptor site called estrogen receptor site alpha.
Yes.
That's what's guiding the preparation for lactation and the preparation for the uterine lining.
Got it.
If the woman does not get pregnant, the whole process reverses, the cells disappear, and that's under the guidance of estrogen receptor site beta.
Right.
And the primary stimulator of estrogen receptor site alpha is estradiol. And the primary stimulator of estrogen receptor site beta is estriol.
Got it.
So it's no coincidence that in a young woman, there's more estriol than there is the sum of estrone and estradiol. Estriol prevails there.
Yes.
And so I know I'm digging into the weeds there and really going into some detail. And I explain that in the book that you can download from Carolyn's website. Facebook page. I'll get them straight someday.
Just give us a call.
So there is reason that we like a high percentage of estriol. We're copying nature there. And not only that, this was based on a 1970 study by an oncologist at the University of Nebraska named Henry Lemon. He wondered if there was any way that breast cancer risk was related to the hormonal balance. And he collected the urines, 24-hour urine testing, 1970, on women who had breast cancer and women who didn't have breast cancer. And what he found in the women who did not have breast cancer is they had a predominance of estriol. In fact, they had 1.3 times as much estriol as they did the sum of estrone and estradiol, whereas women who had breast cancer had much less estriol.
Interesting.
And he even proposed that of the many things that relate to cancer, having the proper hormonal balance, having adequate estriol mattered. So this is not just an idle thing, this development of bias that Dr. Wright suggested to us, Dr. Jonathan Wright, bless his heart and his soul.
Yes.
Your friend and colleague suggested in the early 1980s. It was no accident that bias came about, but all it is copying nature. It's not some radical, someone's fantasy on how maybe we can invent a better woman. No, we're just trying to get it like the original design is. There's one more thing I want to say about this.
Okay.
Our questionnaire, I'm going to make an assumption that the dosage level of estrogens and the balance between estradiol and estriol just needs tweaking, but it needs to be done under the guidance of someone who really is really specializing in this and really does the 24-hour urine hormone test, because I'm asserting that you're not going to get the accurate results to assess this balance unless you do the 24-hour urine hormone test. That's not urine 5-point. That's not collecting urine on filter paper 5 times. It's the 24-hour urine hormone test. I'm emphasizing that. I'm emphasizing that because there's so many people who are using testing that, in my opinion, it is not okay. Just not okay.
Right.
And I know that's a strong opinion, but hey, I got strong opinions.
Well,
Now,
you're entitled to have them.
but you know, you never say never. There's in the world of working with women, there's so much individuality.
Yes.
There's so much individual variation that I'm not going to, if on careful scrutiny and rigorous process, a woman were to wind up only wanting estradiol, I'd be surprised about that. But that would be fine. I'd accept that. A lot of women have done really well on plain old estradiol. It's not my favorite. But listen, if you wind up on pure estradiol and that's what works for you, and you've checked it out through lots of ways of doing it, bless your heart, it's going to be great. So I won't for a moment. I mean, there's a lot of women living on patches that they're doing good work. It's not what I would consider to be the optimal, but gee whiz, millions of American women did well on Premarin and Prempro, horse urine-derived estrogens.
Right.
So we never want to just say that. We always have to zero in on the individual woman, figure out her balance. And I would question whether there was proper balance of progesterone also and proper balance of testosterone and also thyroid. Because when you get into a quirky situation like you don't tolerate estriol at all, it makes me wonder about the whole picture. But hey, listen, if estradiol is doing it for you and you can't figure it out anyway, I'd say embrace it like manna from heaven. It's going to do you some good.
Manna from heaven. Hormones are manna from heaven. I got to tell you, they are indeed. And often you've said, you know, that however it is that has been done has done many women a lot of good, you know, from back in the day to now. And I think that you're absolutely entitled to have your opinions. You've been doing this forever and a day. You know what you're doing. And thank you very much for that answer. I'm welcoming everybody. You know, yes, urine testing is better than blood testing. I'm going to answer that for you.
Well, let me know. I want to answer that one.
No, of course. I'm going to get to that in a sec. Let me just get to, can I go to my other questions?
Sure.
Okay. It's like progesterone day here. So can you please explain how it is that too much or too little of progesterone itself can cause hot flashes? I see in your book about how to find your right dosing, and I thought P is the calming hormone. So when I take too much or too little, I get these hot flashes, and I know it's not the estrogen. How is it that progesterone can do this? I thought it was only estrogen that could cause hot flashes.
Good question. What it comes down to is every single individual woman is used to her unique balance between estrogen and progesterone. Her unique balance between estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, and DHEA. Her unique balance that includes thyroid and every other molecule, cell, tissue, and organ in her body.
Right.
And the art is to get that balance individualized for her.
Right.
And like I was saying, you have the hormone and you have the receptor site within the nucleus of the cell and within the cell. And how hormones operate is the hormone floats into the cell, links up with the receptor site, and it's that union that triggers the biological effect. Ultimately, through the genes, it's just so astounding and it's just absolutely mind-boggling. If you don't believe in God now, just study hormones and receptor sites. You'll get it.
That's really true.
If you don't want to go that deep, just study the female menstrual cycle and you'll believe in the divine.
True.
Now, the estrogens have the greatest affinity to estrogen receptor sites, and every hormone has its preferred receptor site. Progesterone has its preferred receptor sites, progesterone receptor sites, but they're not all that exclusive. For example, estrogen is the one that binds best to estrogen receptor sites.
Okay.
But it's not the only one that binds to estrogen receptor sites. Progesterone binds to estrogen receptor sites, just not as strongly.
Okay.
But Interestingly enough, if you have too small amount of estrogen and too large amount of progesterone, there's this law in chemistry called the law of mass action. And even though progesterone doesn't bind as avidly to estrogen receptor sites, if you got way amount of progesterone in there, way excessive amount, by the law of mass action, it will, just the sheer numbers of molecules will knock estrogen out of its receptor sites, and progesterone will bind to the estrogen receptor sites.
Bingo. Okay.
So if you have too much progesterone and not enough estrogen, that progesterone will knock estrogen out of its receptor sites, and it's one of the mechanisms for a woman getting hot flashes. Now, that's not all that impossible, because the way estrogen is best delivered, by far, no exceptions, is topically. That's the safest and most effective way to do it. And you can do it by milligrams, equivalent to estradiol. Well, progesterone, you're dealing with much higher numbers of milligrams, and it's very common for providers to prescribe a progesterone that's 200 milligrams or even 100 milligrams orally. So that in itself can be too much. The balance isn't correct. I'm not saying that 100 or 200 milligrams is always excessive, but sometimes it is. So one of the things to inspect is, and it's going to have to be inspected by someone who really knows what they're doing,
Right.
that specializes in this, is they got to look at your estradiol dosages or your bias dosages and your progesterone dosages and see if the balance is way off. And yeah, that's one of the ways that you can get a hot flash from too much progesterone. There's another way that these things are so intricate. It's just miraculous. For estrogen to work absolutely at its best, you need progesterone. And one of the things that progesterone does is it sensitizes estrogen to its own receptor sites, to estrogen receptor sites. So you're throwing a little bit of a monkey wrench in there when you throw progesterone in, and if you do it later, or what we always like to do is we like to start off every woman with topical estrogen, biased, and topical progesterone, and we start both at low dosages. And we don't run into that phenomena of a woman immediately getting hot flashes. Now I want to throw a third wrench into it. So if you start low enough and you're starting with topical estrogen and progesterone, it's pretty rare you're going to get into hot flashes.
Right.
But if you're starting with a low dose of estrogen and you're starting with a high dose of oral progesterone, that's one of the possibilities. Let me throw another wrench in there. Sometimes women who haven't seen hormones for a while, they start having hormones, they start getting treated with hormones, they start waking up those receptor sites.
Right.
If a woman hasn't had hormones for a while, those receptor sites have gone dormant. They've gone to sleep. And if you're not careful how you gradually wake them up, you can cause hot flashes by treating with hormones. So I'm not going to immediately conclude that you got the hot flashes from progesterone, although actually your story is pretty clear. When you add progesterone, you start getting the hot flashes. But I suspect that I've made this answer very blurry. Like, what the heck? What did he say? Did this really explain? Well, no worries. You don't have to know the technical details.
Yes.
When you are doing well on estrogen and you add progesterone and you get hot flashes again, you just back up and you start with a low dose of estrogen and you start with a low dose of progesterone, and you find the dose that you can tolerate of both of those, and you gradually increase them. So it doesn't really matter what the theory is. In most instances, we want to replicate nature. A young woman's body is used to both estrogen and progesterone. And we want to replicate that. So you start with a low dose of both and you gradually increase them. And very often that's going to solve it for you. Now, just to make it a little cloudier, there's some women who just do not tolerate progesterone.
Right.
And there's reasons for it. And one of them is receptor site issues. And so you never say never, you just customize it and individualize it for each individual woman. But I wouldn't necessarily give up on progesterone, the questionnaire, because it might be that you just haven't started at the right dosage and you haven't balanced it properly. But eventually, there's rarely, but it does happen, there's women who do not tolerate progesterone, even in the lowest dosages. But we don't figure that out by just assuming it from the beginning. We go back to the basics. We go back to the starting line. We start with low doses of bias. At the same time, we start with low doses of progesterone, and we gradually increase both. And a lot of times that's going to iron out the challenges. You'll figure it out. Now, you never want to leave out the other hormones, because if you don't get the balance properly, including of testosterone, DHA, and thyroid, you could have problems from that in itself. What does it come down to? This. Women need to go shopping to find a healthcare provider who really is savvy about treating women in menopause. You got to find that expert. And then they'll walk it out with you. You'll figure it out. And it's one of the reasons we provide that book, because there's a lot of basics that a woman can find out on her own and learn how to adjust these things on her own. But the bottom line is, this is what every perimenopausal and menopausal woman needs to do as their primary job, is to link up with a healthcare provider who's taken on menopause as one of their favorite things, who's specializing in it, has gone through the education and training and mentoring program so that they know the details.
Then magic happens. I swear to you, it's the honest to God's truth. Menopause is a specialty. It is. Absolutely. And you put that really, really well. So thank you for that. Again, one more progesterone question. Do you know, which I'm sure you do, how progesterone gets absorbed? I took 200 milligrams vaginally, but then I switched to 100 milligram oral gel cap. And I'm wondering if you can explain how these different ways work and if one is better than the other.
I always like to start treating a woman with hormones from the entirely reverse approach. We always start all women on a low dose of Biest and at the same time a low dose of progesterone. We provide them in these organic oil bases. They come out drop by drop. Got two different bottles there, Biest and progesterone. And we have a simple start low and gradually increase. And not only that, we customize it to the individual woman.
Right.
Because there's some women who are so sensitive to everything that we're a lot more cautious with them, because we believe them. We know that that's real. When a woman says to me, be careful, I'm sensitive to everything. Whatever you give anyone, the usual dose, give me 1/10 of it.
Right.
These women have already identified this sensitivity, and
right.
It's a very healthy thing. There's nothing wrong with that. They're just sensitive. So we start much more conservatively with them. And there's other women who their bodies are used to hormones. They're used to rather rich amounts. We'll start them on a little more accelerated approach. The initial doses will be a little higher and we'll go a little faster. But the sensitive ones, or women who haven't seen hormones to speak of, like their last period was 2 years ago and they haven't had any hormones treatment, those are the ones that will also treat them as if they were very sensitive, because their receptor sites are asleep. So regardless, we're starting low and we're gradually increasing. And we're starting topically because the optimal way to take these is through the skin. That's my opinion. Now, occasionally, a woman is not absorbing enough through the skin, especially progesterone, because think about it. A young woman's body in the third week, when progesterone comes on like gangbusters, if a woman ovulates, she's got 100 times more progesterone than she does estrogen.
Right.
And that means that when we write a prescription, we're dealing with milligrams of estrogen, and we're dealing with, in fact, the average in my practice, when we translate bias mathematically, is where it's common, the average for a woman to have 1.7 milligrams of estradiol equivalent. Well, women can use 100 times that much progesterone. So sometimes we can't get the concentration high enough for progesterone, so we'll switch to oral. Why not switch to vaginal? The vagina is a very good absorptive surface, but it takes away the ability to do the 24-hour urine hormone test. And that's very big.
Got it.
Because ultimately, we want accuracy. I want to know how much does a woman have in her body. And the 24-hour urine gives us the ability to do that. But if she's applying estrogen or progesterone intravaginally, the urethra, the opening to the bladder, empties into the vagina. And I can tell you from actual testing this, that the vagina still carries the progesterone or estrogen, and the urine gets these super high levels if a woman is applying a hormone vaginally. Now, we often have women apply hormones to the external perianal mucosa. That's a very absorptive space. After a shower, you can apply progesterone there. You can apply testosterone and DHEA there. We often recommend that. And then you don't want to be applying estrogen intravaginally if you're having intercourse. So it isn't just the same. It isn't just about for a woman who's having intercourse. And I know I'm switching over to estrogen vaginally because a lot of women are taking estrogen intravaginally.
Right.
And I've never seen a need for that, although I have heard one case. In fact, we had a doctor on who she couldn't get it right until she went intravaginal.
Right.
But if it's intravaginal, it's going to pass to your partner if you're having intercourse. If you're heterosexual and you're having intercourse, that's going to pass to your partner. And it'll mess up the 24-hour urine hormone test. You won't be able to get results that you can interpret. So there is an option to topical progesterone that isn't intravaginal. It's oral. We do not give estrogen orally for a lot of good reasons that I explain in the book. And we certainly don't give testosterone orally. Those go topical, and they work great topically. But if we can't get the doses high enough for progesterone, we can give progesterone orally. And here's how I do it. I give a woman a bottle of 30 capsules of 25 milligrams of micronized progesterone, prepared by a compounding pharmacist. And I give her a second 50 milligrams. And we see how much the woman needs, because if she takes in too much at night, she's going to wake up the next morning with something you could interpret as too much calming, because progesterone is calming for most women, not all. She's going to wake up groggy, as if she had taken an overdose of a sleeping pill. Commercially, there's two sizes of oral progesterone available. 100 milligrams and 200 milligrams. And they're in peanut oil, and they've got these dyes in there. So I never use the commercial one, although insurance companies pay for it. So these things always have a lot of things to consider. But I always get the micronized progesterone when I'm going to go to oral. And most of my patients will be very satisfied with 50 milligrams at nighttime or 75 milligrams. That's the most common dosage that women feel like their anxiety is calmed down and they're getting good sleep. Some women need 100 or 125 milligrams or even 150 milligrams. Doesn't matter to me. Some women need less than 50. Some women need 25 milligrams or even less. What's the moral of the story? It's the same old story. It's figure it out, start low, gradually increase. So I just don't see a need for vaginal, and it would be okay, except it just interferes with the very best and most accurate test we have is the 24-hour urine hormone test. So that's why I don't recommend
Right,
it.
and that's important. And so that's going to lead me in here, welcoming Ginny and Sarah and Boblop, and our Facebook user. And Boblop had asked a question. I cannot see it because of my cursor very down at the bottom, but she wanted to know, I believe, about there are a lot of questions about testing, the 24-hour urine testing, and stating that many, many doctors use blood tests, and they do.
Well, let me address that one.
Please, because she got kind of upset because we didn't answer her questions.
Let me address it right now.
Yes, absolutely.
Medical testing in general is extremely useful. And I know there's a lot of criticism of it, but not from me. I love medical testing, and I love blood testing for so many reasons. For example, I wouldn't dream of managing a diabetic without getting blood glucose levels, blood insulin levels, and hemoglobin A1C.
Of course.
They're so useful. They're so useful. And yes, there's issues around the reference ranges. But still, once you understand reference ranges and how to interpret them, the blood tests are fantastic for that. Hormone testing, however, is a whole different story when a woman is in menopause. When you have a young woman and you want to test her estrogen levels, blood testing works, providing you know when you're in the menstrual cycle and when you're doing it. But the moment you start treating a woman with hormones, blood testing doesn't work. And there's two major traditional approaches, societies that are advisors to traditional doctors about hormones. One of them is called the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecologists, ACOG. The other one is called the North American Menopause Society. They're the voice of the traditional. And both of them have white papers in which they advise traditional doctors, do not do blood tests on women in menopause. It doesn't work. They also say do not do saliva tests. I am 100% agreement with them. Let's talk about blood tests. A woman applies her hormones in the morning and in the evening. When do you draw her blood? Do you draw it just before she applies her hormones? Do you draw it a half hour after she applies her hormones? Do you draw it an hour or 2 hours? Well, you're up against something called pharmacokinetics. Right. How fast does it absorb and when does it peak? And you just do not get the information that you need. And you do not get the information about the metabolites, how the estrogen is processed, or the androgens for that example. So I'm in agreement that blood tests just don't tell you enough. Blood tests tells me spectacular things about many things. In fact, if I want to understand thyroid, I use blood tests. I don't use the 24-hour urine hormone test. And it's imperative that every woman gets a sex hormone binding globulin at the beginning of starting menopause and many other tests. But the 24-hour urine hormone test is perfect for assessing how much hormone is in a woman while she's being treated. Here's the instructions we give to women. If we're going to do the 24-hour urine hormone test, we want you to be religious for at least 5 days prior to the test collection. That means we want you to not miss any doses. And not only that, we want you to take your hormones certainly while you're collecting your urine for 24 hours. That way we get a real-time assessment of the parent hormones. There's 3 of them in the estrogen family alone. The metabolites, they relate to risk, and they give us a lot of information. So it works beautifully. Why it's not embraced is it's such a learning curve. When you look at, it's such a learning curve for the professional. When I first saw my the first 24-hour urine hormone test results that I ever saw, there was like 15, 20 analytes in there. It was a whole new world to me. It was daunting. I had never seen so many hormones and so many metabolites. And I think this is the main reason it's not done.
Yeah.
And I think one of the reasons that healthcare providers often use is, well, I can't ask a woman to collect her urine for 24 hours. Well, I think that's not correct, because in 25 years of testing women, I have never had pushback. I've never had a woman say to me, I'm not going to do this. Women are smart. They do what they do what's going to work. They want what's going to work. And it's not that hard to collect your urine for 24 hours. Now, there's other urine tests that have emerged here in recent years. And you pee onto filter paper 5 times in a 24-hour urine, in a 24-hour period. And I'm going to challenge those. And without going into explanation today, I'm going to say they're not okay. Okay, that's a strong opinion. I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of pushback about that. But there's scientific reasons for that. I'm not trying to interfere with anyone's business, but I have very significant concerns about it. So am I an advocate of 24-hour urine hormone tests? Yeah, you can get a real-time picture of what's going on in a woman's body. And not only that, many years ago, I was able to go into the medical literature and correlate what's too much and what's too little hormone for a woman in menopause.
Oh, it's just so important.
And the laboratory that I work with, when I presented what the reference range, not what's too much and what's too little, and the PhD who owns the lab saw the rigor of my science there, he was willing to print that too much and too little for a woman in menopause. So when you look at all these other test results, they've got these very wide ranges. They don't know exactly what's right because they haven't done that work. So for all these reasons, 24-hour urine hormone tests, and everyone that's doing, every professional that we're training in the menopause method, they're all doing 24-hour urine hormone tests. And how did I learn about it? I started out with saliva. It seemed simple. It didn't work. It didn't correlate with my patients. And I had a couple of doctor friends who were treating women in menopause. They said, you got to try the 24-hour urine hormone test. You're going to learn everything that you want. And boy, once I did, I'm here today, Carolyn. You and I would not be on this interview today because I would never have been able to come as knowledgeable and experienced as I am in treating women in menopause. And one of the reasons is that 24-hour urine hormone test.
Absolutely. I understand this. I do. And it, it's back to that repetition breeds retention, and it really does. It has taken me a good couple of years to really wrap my mind around this. So we have people asking, like, where can we get the 24-hour urine test? I'd like to take it and give my results to my provider. Another one, how do we get these tests done? We don't have them in the UK.
Okay, let me pause right there. Actually, the lab that we use does ship to the UK.
Interesting.
But like any sophisticated laboratory test, they have to be ordered by a healthcare professional who's licensed. That can be in the UK, that can be in the United States. So, you've got a little bit of a hill to climb here. It's inspiring your healthcare provider to order the test for you and get the kit shipped to you, because it's like any significant laboratory test, it must be ordered by a licensed healthcare professional. Now, you can contact us at the Menopause Method, and we can link you up if we have people that are in our mentoring program in your state, and it takes you back to your basic job. Find a specialist who really knows what they're doing. And we're now training people in about 14 states.
Mm-hmm.
And it won't be long. I'd say by the end of 2021, we'll be covering all 50 states. And are we trying to get into Canada and the UK?
No,
We tried to venture into the UK on several occasions. So if you have a healthcare provider in the UK or in Canada or in the state that you're in that might be interested in mastering this and specializing in it, in becoming expert in it, have them email me at drr@menopausemethod.com. I'm sorry I can't name commercial labs on Facebook, but you can email us and someone on our staff will tell you the name of the lab that can do it. So email us at drr@menopausemethod.com.
right. And then you can do that. Dean is asking, I guess, West Virginia, providers in West Virginia. So if you email dr@menopausemethod.com, absolutely, if there's a doctor there, then you will be referred to that doctor. There's a whole bunch of information that certainly can be given. Yeah, God, that 24-hour urine test, I do it. I've been doing it. It's the only way I've done it. So you pretty well answered all of those for sure. This is one question I would like to ask. And I hope, Bob Blop, we answered your question for you. Certainly did not mean to ignore you. Testosterone.
Carolyn, there's that one other question that you were going to ask about, do we take our hormones the day of testing?
Yes. Yes,
we do, and I have answered it. But that's the whole wonderful, amazing advantage of it. You take your hormones religiously for 5 days before, plus including the day that you're collecting your urine. Therefore, we get to see how those hormones that you're taking are actually behaving in your body. So there is no conflicting information about that.
Right.
You take your hormones. Now, the one caveat is that some providers will say that if you're taking oral hormones, omit those the night before and the night of. Not in our method. We do it a different way. Even if you're taking it orally, we have you take them right on through, just like you always do. Now, that requires a different understanding of how to interpret the test results, but that's how we prefer to do it. Other people can make a case of omitting oral hormones, but not topical. Everyone takes topical hormones exactly like you always do, right on through the 24-hour urine hormone collection.
Well, it would seem to make sense, because then you would be able to see, like, what's up. If you're not taking any hormones, it doesn't seem to make any sense to test if you're not taking
Really?
hormones.
I know.
I mean, to me, layperson,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
No, I get it. I'm with you. It wouldn't make any sense. Why would you test if you weren't taking your hormones? You don't need to know your hormone levels if you're not on hormones. They're low.
Yeah, they don't exist, right?
You're in menopause. You're very, very low. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've always kind of maintained that. For me, like, not having hormones in my system forever and ever and like 17 years, it's a long time. It didn't make any sense for me to test because I knew I didn't have any.
Correct.
So I have someone, our Facebook user, revealing more about herself. I am also 62 and I've never been on hormones. First for urine test.
Well, no, if you're 62, and this will have to be the last question that I answer today, and it's so nice being with you again, Carolyn. It's so great.
Oh my God.
We had that little lull.
I have to just have you playing 24/7 in the background,
We had that lull, and
yeah, that was bad.
And it's great.
We're
so
celebrating.
I'm really enjoying hanging out with you, and
yeah.
the if you're 62, there's absolutely no need in the world to test your hormones before you go on them, because your hormone levels are super low. If you're not menstruating, your estrogen is very low and your progesterone zip, a little bit coming out of it. And by 62, your testosterone and DHEA are super low. Now, there was a time early on in my career that if you were 62 and you hadn't been on hormones, I would have tested you. And you would have gotten to pay, for example, $290. And I would have looked at your test results and I would have gone, oh, you're very low in estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, and DHEA.
Right.
And you would have gone, gee, thank you very much.
Right.
I learned that I was very low. And then but you also might have thought, hey, wait a minute. Sort of makes sense that I was very low, and you just had me pay $290 for what? To tell me that I was low? I already knew that. So there's no point in testing you when you're 62 because you are low. Now, we test 100% of our patients, but we do so usually at the 3 to 4 month mark.
Right.
Because it usually takes about 3 to 4 months for you to dial your dosages into good levels. And when we want to test you, my favorite way to test is a woman says, oh my God, I'm feeling myself again. I feel so much better.
Uh-oh.
That's when we test. And that's when we want to know, are you in the appropriate ranges? Because even if you feel so much better, 25% of you are going to be on too much, and 50% of you are going to be on too little to protect your vagina and your bones, for example, not to mention your artery and your brain. So we always test 100% of our patients. But if you're saying that you feel pretty good, it's just a tweak away of the dosages if you don't land right in the zone.
Right. And so for Joanne, who just said, wait, exclamation, exclamation, would this be the same for a 59-year-old woman? Testing not necessary?
If you're menstruating at 59, which would be very unusual, but possible, you really don't want to test you because you're going to be in the perimenopause. You're going to have erratic levels. So it totally depends what day we choose to test you. You'll just get confounding results. But most women at 59-year-old are not menstruating at all. So there's no need to test you. Don't spend the money. Here's what you're going to learn. If you're not menstruating, you're 59 years old, you're going to learn, oh, my hormone levels are super low. Well, thanks a lot. I already knew that from my symptoms.
Right.
I already knew that from the multiple problems I'm having. So I already knew they were low. So there's no need to. But again, we're going to test 100% of the women when they say, hey, we figured it out. This is great. And there's a few women that will even test before that. If we're having a little challenge figuring out their balance and stuff, we may want to see where they are and the dosages there are. That happens about 10% of the time. We'll do 2 tests in that first year, but most women, it's just that one test. And then we test annually. We test our women and Menopause Method members every single year.
So I got to say this because oftentimes I will hear women saying, I went to my doctor, I've not had a period in 3 years and I feel horrible. I went to the doctor and he refused to test me. So I fired him. And you're just...
Well, a doctor refusing to test a woman, that word refusal is a little loaded. I mean, it's the doctor saying, well, my gosh, my good patient, there's no reason for me to test you. I already know.
Different, yeah.
Or is the doctor going, I refuse to test you. The attitude really matters here.
Yeah.
But no matter what the attitude is, I could understand why a doctor wouldn't want to test a woman who hasn't had a period for a couple of years. Yeah. They know the result. They know that the woman is low, and it's not going to be of any value to test their hormone levels.
Right.
So it's not a bad thing.
Right.
Although attitude really matters.
Oh my God. Yes. Well, that's why you and I are sitting here, for sure.
And Carolyn, I'm so sorry, but I've got a hard stop today. And
why am I surprised?
And thanks, and how good that we're back in action here together. That's great.
Oh my God. And thank you, Andre, for making that happen. Jennifer, we'll get to you in our next, on Thursday. I'll write this question down. It'll be my first one that I ask. And thank you, Dr. Rosensweet. Thank you to the women up here. And, if we didn't answer your question, please send it to me at the Ins and Outs of Menopause with David Rosensweet, MD, and we'll absolutely get to them. I do promise you that one way or another. So have a great, whatever today is. What is today? Tuesday? Tuesday. Yeah. All day too, huh?
Good to see you again, Carolyn. Hi to Daryl. Say hi to Daryl.
Indeed.
Your wonderful husband and friend. Yeah.
Yes, he's a wonderful man. So hello to the entire Rosensweet team. Thank you, ladies. Thank you, kiddies. God bless, and we'll talk to you later.
All righty. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye. Bye.